Okay, then. So good morning once again. Good afternoon for our friends of Australia and New Zealand. And I'm really happy to have you here today for our Global Customers webinar on one of our most exciting features of recent time, the Revenue Recognition module. Today, we're going to have a short overview of what is revenue recognition. I'm sure all of you that have this particular need in your business already know the answer to that. Then I'm going to describe how we implemented revenue recognition in Priority. And then we're going to switch to a live demo. During those three sections, you're very welcome to write down your questions in the question box. And in the end, I'll spend some time answering the questions that are relevant to most of the participants. So let's dive in. So when we tackled the revenue recognition point, initially, we approached our partners at EY to understand what are the fundamentals of providing revenue recognition experience in an ERP system. And we essentially understood it's made up of 5 basic steps. First of all, we need to identify what are the contracts with the customers that generate the revenue. Then, what are the obligations of those contracts? While each and every obligation can have different behavior in respect to revenue recognition. Then we need to determine the transaction price along with the fair value, allocate the transaction price to the performance obligations, and finally, recognize the revenue. So the principle is to recognize deferred revenue as events happen, which allow us, from an accounting standpoint, to recognize that revenue. In Priority, we decided to make the sales order the principal contract with the customer. Of course, we realize that there are businesses who don't work with sales orders, or maybe work with sales orders in another system, which is not Priority, and only start their sales process in Priority from the invoice step. So for the sake of those customers, we also allow the option of having the sales invoice as the main contract point with the customer for those sales invoices that are not based on sales orders. Then once we have the contract in place, if it's the order or the invoice, we identify the contract obligations, which are the sales order or the invoice lines, respectively. We identify the principle and timing of recognition. We allow for various principles and timings of recognition, as I will shortly show you in the demo. If the principle is of recognition that is spread over a period of time, then we define that period as part of the contract obligation, which is order or the invoice line. And finally, we assign the price. Then we determine the fair value by splitting that transaction price into components that make up that price and have various principle and timings of recognition for the same part of the transaction or for all parts of the transaction. And finally, we recognize the revenue by posting the journals that shift the deferred revenue to the actual revenue, of course, in a fully automated way. By billing, delivery, and reporting progress, we affect the planned recognition and we start moving it gradually towards actual recognized revenue using those same journal entries. Now that's the theory. And now I want to jump to Priority and show you how it's done. So this is my Priority in version 21, which was just recently released. The Priority software offers revenue recognition module as of version 20.1. So this is the second version where this module is available to you. We start off by defining the part numbers that we sell and we need to recognize revenue for. So I'm starting off by showing you the financial parameters for parts form. Now you can see here that I've already chosen all the parts that are relevant for the revenue recognition process because they have a revenue recognition rule. So the first thing we need to do is to define for each part that we need to put in the revenue recognition process, what is the revenue recognition rule for it? The options are recognition of the full amount, recognition of prorate over even periods, recognition as a percentage of the work complete. This is mainly relevant for a project type of businesses, and VSOE components. The VSOE components refer to the scenario where we need to take one single part that we sell and split it up into several parts that actually recognize revenue in various ways. And this is exactly the example that we're going to look at right now. But just before we do that, the other definition that goes with revenue recognition rule is the revenue recognition timing, when we want to recognize the revenue. So the options here are immediately, at the point of billing, at the point of delivery, or manually when the user indicates that we need to start recognizing the revenue. The manual option naturally needs to be there because for some businesses, the predefined option is just not going to be right as for their business process. So we also allow the manual option. Now, the part that I'm showing you here right now is a classical part for revenue recognition. A commercial license, imagine that you're a software company and that you have a commercial license that you sell in your sales orders as a part, and that is what the customer should and can see, only the part for the commercial license. Now, behind the scenes of this commercial license, there are a few components as far as your business is concerned that make up this license. In this example, I've created a part that has two components. For each of them, I created the part number that is separate, and I linked these two parts to my commercial license part. The first one is the product component, and the second one is the service and maintenance component. Now, I decided that in my business, 35% of the value of the transaction would be allocated as a general rule to the product and 65% to the service and maintenance. This can be changed on the level of a particular transaction. This is just a default definition that can be then overwritten in the sales order line or the invoice line. Now, after I've broken up my commercial license into two components that are strictly internal and are behind the scenes, and the end customer never needs to see them, and they're not printed or shown anyway, it's internal, I decided to allocate the product component the revenue recognition rule of the full amount, because I want to recognize the entire amount at once, and the revenue recognition timing is immediate. So once the order is in place, I can start recognizing revenue for this 35% of the transaction that make up the product component. But the service component, I decided to allocate it the revenue recognition rule of equal over even periods. And I only want to start recognizing revenue for this component after billing took place. All these definitions, the percentage value and the revenue method and the revenue timing can be changed on a particular transaction level. Okay, so that's the basic definition on the part level. If you have many parts, you can also skip this definition on the part level and make it on the part family level. The part family is a higher level, and then every part in that family will inherit the definition, and you don't have to go over all the parts and make those definitions for them. Another thing that worth mentioning and has to do with the equal prorate over time even periods is the revenue recognition term. This is the number of months over which I usually spread the recognition of a particular part. So in this case, I said 12 months, and this is something that's going to help me later on when I key in my sales order or my sales invoice in defining the term of recognition, which you will see in a minute. So leaving this area and going on into the sales order, today I'm going to use the example of a sales order as the contract obligation. As we said in the presentation, it also can be the sales invoice. So it doesn't have to be an order, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to use an order, which is the classic way to do it. So you see an order that here that I have prepared in advance earlier today, and it has just one part on it, the commercial license, the part that combines it all, and the part that the end customer will actually see print out on the invoice later on and on every document. You can see here that I decided to sell 10 licenses at this and this unit price. I've also defined the duration of the term for the components that are spread over even periods of time. So my term starts on May 1st and ends on April 30th of next year, 12 months. Now, when I go into the VSOE components, the form here initially inherits the definitions that I've just shown you on the part number, but you can see that I've already made some changes. In this particular order, I decided that 50% of the transaction will go to the product component and 50% to the service component. I made no changes to the revenue recognition method or timing, but I could if I wanted to. Now, after this order is keyed into the system, I naturally move it to the next status in line, as we always do. And in this case, it's confirmed. Now, one of the things that you can decide is at which status of each document the revenue recognition process is going to be driven forward. So you have a flag on the statuses here saying that this status affects revenue recognition. You can see it here on the sub-level, included in revenue recognition. So I don't want my draft orders to affect revenue recognition. I only want my confirmed orders to affect recognition, so I flag the confirmed status and naturally every other status that comes after that in the chain of statuses of the sales order, so that the order continues to be recognized. So once I've switched the status to confirmed, I'm now going to take you to a brand new entity that is called revenue recognition planning. You can see here that we have a transaction for revenue recognition. Transaction date, so day only, so we don't see too many lines here. Okay, you can see that this sales order has created two lines in the revenue recognition planning. Why two? Because we had two components that made up the revenue recognition of my one single part called a commercial license. You can see here the components themselves, the product component for this order line and the service component for this order line. You can see the total transaction of the order and the allocation percentage of this component, and hence the allocation sum for this planning line. Now, because I've split them both into 50 and 50, those sums are identical. In the sub-level of revenue recognition progress, you can see one line for the upper level line of the product component, because the recognition for this component is of the whole amount and it's immediate. So the whole amount is to be recognized at the end of the month of the transaction date for the sales order, hence the end of this month. On the other hand, the service component initially did not have anything in the sub-level, and only when I build the sales order, here is my invoice number, only then the revenue recognition progress was filled in for this line, and it contains the 12 months of the periods over which I spread the recognition of this item, because this item was defined as recognition of even periods over time, and the timing of the recognition was billed. So after I completed the billing by creating this sales invoice, I can now see that I have the revenue recognition progress plan. Now, there are a few things that you can do on the level of the planning record here. You can make some manual changes. For example, you can change here the allocation amount manually if for whatever reason it needs to be different from what was calculated based on the contract. You can make changes to the term here, the term start and term end if you need to change the term. You can from here use the actions on the panel here above to freeze the term or unfreeze the term for the lines that have equal amount spread over a period. For example, if something unforeseen happens, like COVID, and your customers stop paying you the retainer for whatever reason, and they ask you to postpone their payments, and then you need to reflect that in your books so you can temporarily freeze and unfreeze the recognition. So those are things that you can manually do from this planning area. You can also not go into the planning at all. Everything happens automatically. I'm just showing you the reflection of it in the system. If everything goes smoothly and you don't need to have any manual interventions, you can never visit the planning form, but of course you will, at least in the beginning. Now, after I've finished planning my revenue, the next step is to actually recognize the revenue. And for this, I have my revenue recognition procedure. I have a whole new menu here under the finance called revenue recognition. Here you can see all the definitions and the reports and the procedures that you've seen in the planning form that you can run for multiple planning lines from the menu, etc. And the recognized revenue procedure itself. When you run the recognized revenue procedure, you select the date to which you want to run the revenue. And of course, you can run it on a multi-company basis if you wish to recognize revenue across all your companies if you are a distributed organization. I've already done this, and I'll show you the result back in the planning form. So, going back to my planning form, the first line was due for recognition on April 30th because it was set to be recognized immediately. So after I ran the procedure, a journal entry was created and associated with this line. And in essence, what this journal entry does, it shifts the revenue from the deferred revenue account into which the invoice has placed it and into the actual revenue. In this case, from deferred revenue to the income account I've defined for the particular part. If we go to the, and actually the revenue recognition transaction code is a unique code, so you can easily retrieve transactions that are revenue recognition transactions if you need to for whatever reason. It's a new transaction code that was introduced to the system. If we go to the other item that starts recognition only from May 1st, because that's the beginning of the term, you can see that the system has not yet recognized anything of the revenue because I only ran recognition up to and including April 30th. So those entries are yet to come. Now, after I've shown you the revenue recognition journal, it's worthwhile taking a step back and showing you another new definition that is available on the system, and that's the definition of the accounts that participate in the revenue recognition process. So, if up until now we only use the account for revenue as the definition for sales invoices, we now have a new dimension that is called deferred income account. Now, this dimension is available in the same places of the system where you would have the income account. So you have it for accounting families, you have it for customer types, you can define just one single deferred income account on the company accounts level. So in every place where you could, up until now, define an income account, you can now also define a deferred revenue account. And for all those parts that participate in the revenue recognition process, that have a revenue recognition method assigned to them, the invoice will put the income into the deferred income account and not in the income account, because the income account will only be credited after the revenue recognition is actually performed. And finally, let's have a look at the report that shows us the progress and the anticipated progress of the revenue recognition process in our company. And this is the revenue recognition forecast report. You can run it for any period of time. You can see it in two available formats, a list format or a group by project format if you're working with projects. You can see it as a consolidated report if you want to have a multi-company view of your revenue recognition or not. In this case, I'm just going to run it as a simple report. And what you can see here is that every document, every contract obligation would normally have one or two lines in this report, depends if it already has actual recognized or only planned revenue. And let's have a look at this particular new order that I keyed into today, and we'll see how the progress is reflected in the report. So you can see that this line appears twice, one entry for the recognized and one for the planned. So I ran this report from the beginning of the year. So I have one column for past events, what happened before the date of my report, so before 2021. I have January, February, March, and then April. Here's the actual recognition for April for that line of the product component. And then the license or the service component, not yet recognized, but spread over a period of time, appears here. So for every month of the year, we have the figure that's going to be recognized in this month. Now, the recognition of this item will take longer than the duration of the period that I ran the report. So we have another column for future, and everything that is past the range of dates for my report will appear in the future column. And this is the rest of the sums for January, and February, March, and April of 2022. Naturally, the total of my recognition for this item will match the allocated recognition for this item. And this is the revenue recognition planning. And this is about it from what I wanted to show you today. There are more things to discuss in respect to revenue recognition that are more detailed about exchange rates and the more subtle definitions. But I want to take the time now to see the questions that you've written and try to answer as many of them as possible. And of course, if you have other questions and you want to have a more in-depth understanding of how revenue recognition is applicable to your business and you want to talk to a dedicated implementation team member that works with revenue recognition for our clients, you're more than welcome to talk to us, and we will be more than happy to help. I want to see the questions now. Okay, so there was a question about is there a way to automate the VSOE allocation? So the original module, as you see it now, and as it is available currently in the market, the VSOE percentage allocation is strictly manual. But we do understand that there's need for automation in this area, and we are working right now on the first step for this automation, which will be available as early as version 21.1, that will be out in October. And in that version, you will have the first step towards automation of the VSOE percentage allocation by way of using a customer price list and automatically retrieving the percentage according to the pricing of the components in the price list, relatively one to the other, or absolutely relatively to the amount of the entire document. So this is planned. You've also asked, does contract have to be an SO or can it be a project? The contract has to be an SO, okay? But if you are working in a project-driven environment, you can combine the project into your revenue recognition module and your SO. This means that you will associate a project item, a WBS, with the sales order line, and then over time, you will be able to update the system with the progress. So if the sales order line that is linked to a project obligation has now progressed as to 20% of completion, the revenue recognition will be 20% of the order. Another question you've asked is, can you update recognition later? Not sure I understand exactly what you mean by later, but there are a few options in this respect. If you're asking about the option to make changes, so this is completely supported. So if you have a sales order and it's already moved to the status of confirmed, or you have an invoice and it's already posted, and revenue recognition started rolling, even in the planning of it or in the actual journal entry phase of it, you can still go back and the system knows to auto-correct itself and cancel out transactions and lines that were already recognized, and then recalculate according to the new amounts that you put in place or the new term that you put in place. So everything is very flexible in this respect, and you absolutely can go back and forth with that. Another question was, can you upload multiple percent of project completion? Say you have many projects to recognize. Well, the way that you actually update the system regarding the project completion is completely up to you. You can manually key in, you can upload via an interface from a file, or you can connect another system where you actually manage your projects and update the system via API. All options are on the table. It doesn't matter which way you update the percentage complete. The revenue recognition will be driven according to that anyway. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I would say this, the revenue recognition module is available again as of version 20.1 for our Priority Pro customers. And if you want to explore if it fits the bill for your particular business, please do contact us and we'll be happy to explore it with you. And for now, just want to thank you and looking forward to welcoming you back here in our next webinar on priority features. Bye now.